This week's podcast episode was originally broadcast in September 2025 during our Social Talent Live webinar. If you missed this free event when it was broadcasted live, be sure to sign up for the next one over on socialtalent.com/live.
I'd like to welcome Marcus Thorpe from Thoughtworks. So Marcus runs TA over at Thoughtworks, and Marcus can perhaps explain a little bit more about what Thoughtworks do if you haven't come across it before. And I've been a big admirer of Marcus's work and his team's work over the last couple of years in terms of pioneering a lot of innovation in recruiting. So no surprise when Marcus was sharing with me earlier this year that he had deployed interview intelligence tools across the business. Marcus, you're very welcome to SD Live. Maybe could you start by just giving people a bit of context as to who Thoughtworks are, the type of hiring you do, the type of team you have, and kind of what kind of technologies or skills you're hiring for that you thought this would be a good solution for?
Absolutely. Thanks for inviting me. So I'm Marcus Thorpe, Global Head of TA for Thoughtworks. We are a professional services company. We design bespoke software and technical solutions for big enterprise companies. We're not integrating somebody else's software. We're building it from soup to nuts for ourselves. So the types of people we're hiring globally, we're in 19 different countries around the world. So 5 continents globally. We hire predominantly developers, about 60% software developers, and then business analysts, QA, data engineers, AI designers, etc. So it's very technical in its nature. We're looking for best of breed technical talent to work on client sites with clients, pairing with them on building code to sort of support their technical needs of the future.
What have your kind of hiring volumes been on average over the last few years, Marcus?
They've gone up and down, but we're setting ourselves up to hire, somewhere between 3,000 and 4,000 people annually around the world. Where we hire them differs. Right now, India and Brazil are our biggest areas. A lot of the work comes from what we call Global North, so sort of sales countries like the UK and Australia and Singapore and the US, but it's delivered by people in our delivery centers in the likes of India, Brazil, Spain, etc.
For those new to the concept or the category, can you maybe start us off, Marcus, by explaining what is interview intelligence? What are these tools? What do they do? And why do you think lots of companies are adopting them?
Well, ever since COVID, we all ran quickly towards Zoom and the like for video interviewing because we couldn't get people in the office. And as a result, all of our candidates are used to using video technology in the interviewing that we facilitate. We found no discernible loss of quality as a result of it. We're able to conduct the same interviews, and we move very quickly towards that. So interview intelligence allows interface with Zoom or Google Meet or whichever tool you use to record, transcribe, summarize, and then analyze interviews to generate insights. Insights could be for the individual interviewer, and insights can absolutely be for the interview panel. We need to have efficient, data-driven decisions made. Our debriefs are done online and virtually as well. So the more data we can collect from the interviews, the better, to make those decisions as objective as possible. We have a process called Joy of Interviewing, which is meant to be joyful for both candidate and interviewer alike. And that's the goal of that. The primary goal internally is to make all of our interviewers confident and competent. And after initial training, it's very hard to be able to give them insights as to what they're doing well and what they could do better. And at the same time, we want to make sure that candidates have the optimal experience in terms of having a conversation face-to-face rather than staring at the top of someone's head while they're frantically writing notes on the interview that's being conducted.
I think we'd all agree that having a tool that takes notes, prompts you with the right structure, gives you analysis and feedback is great, right? But these things cost money, they cost time to implement. and we're in an environment where you can't just go buy new tools all the time. So talk to me about the business case of this, Marcus. What was the problem you're trying to solve, apart from, hey, this would be cool, which isn't a business case? What was the kind of real thing you went after to get budget, to get the resources, and decide this was a priority project for you for the year?
Yeah, well, our most precious resource internally is interviewer time. We're constantly battling to remind thought workers that there is a corporate entity as well as the teams that they're supporting for the clients that we have. And so maximizing that time, making sure that we pull them away from billing as little as possible is a key component. So we did an estimate that conservatively we'd expect 15 minutes of feedback to be committed to after an interview. And with the volume of interviewing we're doing, that meant we were effectively using about 30,000 hours of total time per annum spent filling in scorecards. And that's assuming the scorecards were completed to our satisfaction. Quite often we'd have to chase and rechase for more and more detail. As I mentioned before, we wanted structured debriefs with the complete information so we can make those decisions as objective as possible by people who had met or hadn't met the candidate. We wanted to look at silver medalists. We did an okay job being at the time, SOX compliant company, publicly traded at the time, in terms of capturing offer-based feedback. But for those that didn't get offers, sometimes it was negligible or non-existent. And with a 5-to-1 face-to-face to offer ratio, typically across our technical roles, we wanted to make sure that we could access those 4 that didn't get an offer from us. And then last but not least, we wanted to make sure that our interviewer journey, which incorporates training and then shadow interviews, it was really key to submit feedback separate from the person that you're shadowing or that you're conducting the reverse shadow with. We often found that there would be a conversation just to sort of discuss prior to submitting feedback. And we wanted to make sure that there was less bias in the process by allowing both individuals to submit feedback separately and to make sure the shadows were being completed in a way that we felt delivered those competent and confident interviewers.
Once you'd established the business case for this, Marcus, and decided that this is something that was worth solving, had great value to the business, what was the kind of time frame from going out there and assessing vendors all the way through to signing a contract and going live? And did you go live without pilots? Did you pilot? What scale? Walk me through that, just for anyone else thinking, okay, this could be interesting. What are you facing into? And I'll probably preface this by saying, my opinion, Thoughtworks move fast, right, compared to other organizations. So what does fast look like?
Well, we ran an RFP process. There are several vendors out there. We reviewed all of them and we came down to sort of a short list of 3. And then we made a decision. At that point, we were probably in the summer of last year. And then it took us about 8 weeks to move from having made the decision with the vendor of choice to having all of the contractual obligations in place. We made a decision in November. So we had done a lot of the prep work in advance. We'd had conversations through previous RFPs, etc. We knew we had to involve legal very closely, InfoSec compliance. We did all that work up front to make sure we were able to accelerate. But ultimately, the decision took about 8 weeks from decision to sign contract. Then we went live officially in early 2025. And then we basically took a couple of months to put some of the process into place. We had to set up Greenhouse, which is our ATS, with the right attributes to map to our tool, to our interview intelligence tool. And then we piloted with our TA team. So we started with ourselves, ate our own dog food, and then that was in April. And then we, over the course of the next couple of months, we rolled it out with our biggest region, which is India and the Middle East, because we thought we might as well go big and go home. So we ironed out some of the issues from a TA perspective, with some of the initial pushback or concerns that we had internally. But we're then able to roll out in the summer with India, and now all of our regions are online with the tool.
Tell me about those concerns. Like, maybe start with concerns you had when you initially went to vendors and started talking to them. What kind of concerns did you have to get over? And then what kind of concerns did you face in the business, and how did you overcome them?
Yeah. Biggest concerns were twofold. When we started the process, we wanted to make sure that the AI was being used in a way that wasn't going to make decisions. We had the looming guillotine of EU law in particular. Brazil has some very similar law, and that's pending as well, to make sure that decisions weren't being made by the technology. They were empowering the interviewers to make better decisions. Both from a TA perspective, when we piloted, some of the concerns were that some of our interviewers, some of our recruiters conducting phone screens wanted to conduct those over the phone, and they wanted to sort of surprise. In some parts of the world, they wanted to sort of call their candidates ad hoc, and they felt they were getting a better response that way. What we were able to do with the tool very quickly is demonstrate that candidates actually preferred to have something scheduled. They felt that a structured, scheduled conversation, even with a recruiter, was advantageous to themselves, and they weren't being surprised and caught, at lunch where they had to go and sort of move away from a colleague, etc. Interviewers were worried what we're going to do with recordings. That was always a concern, and it was never the intention to be Big Brother. In fact, we made the decision very early that the content of the video was solely for the usage of the interviewer. In other words, if they spotted something that was a yellow flag during the conversation, if something weird happens, in terms of, a change of a visual that suspected that some sort of AI was being used, etc., they could flag it and go back and review it. Similarly, if they weren't convinced summarization was perfect, they could go back and see the exact words being said. So we made the decision very early to address that proactively, to make it very, very clear that the video content was solely for their usage. The summarization could be submitted with a press of a button into Greenhouse, but the access to video was limited to a tiny number of admins globally, just to make sure that if legal required it, we were able to access it. But ultimately, the individual themselves was the one that was empowered. It wasn't for our usage. It wasn't for us to tell recruiters, for recruiters to tell interviewers how to do their job. It was for us to use the aggregated data we're getting from all of the feedback to provide those insights for the interviewer.
How about the candidates? How did they react once you begun to push this live? Did you measure things like opt-out rates, etc.?
Yes, absolutely. We were warned in advance that opt-out rates might be circa 3%. Just under was the sort of the rates that we were expecting. We have found that it's been a lot lower than that. Opting out is more like just over 1% right now, which is fantastic. We do have some parts of the world that haven't gone live yet because we're working with legal entities just to make sure that it's going to be okay there. So then it may go higher, but for now it's much lower than the expected rates. We've been using Zoom interviews even prior to COVID, but it's been solely the way that we interview everybody for the last 5 years. So candidates are already used to that format. So recording wasn't seen as disruptive, seeing as our messaging was very much supporting the fact that we wanted to make more objective decisions rather than for any other reason. We had to be very transparent throughout the process. We took vendor messaging, which they provide in spades. We sort of adapted it and made it authentic for our needs, but candidates have taken it very, very well. And we emphasize objectivity and fairness, and candidates have responded very well. Even in the candidate surveys we do, they're actually suggesting that it's a preferable process to one they may have seen elsewhere in the past.
Did you begin to see the ROI you're expecting, and did you find anything that was unexpected, positively or negatively?
Well, we've definitely seen a positive response. There was internal skepticism, without doubt, up front. There was this fear of, why would we do this? Why would we want to record? There was definitely a question in some parts of the world about opt-in versus opt-out, which we're still sort of navigating through. Most of the world were using opt-out, but there are some countries which are suggesting that opt-in would be preferable. We absolutely have a seamless integration with both Zoom, which is our video conference tool, and Greenhouse, which is fantastic. It really is. Once it's set up correctly, it's able to recognize attributes. We're able to provide a sidebar for new interviewers to ask questions if they run out of questions, if they haven't conducted many solo interviews, and they are super responsive to that. Feedback loops are better. Obviously the comprehensiveness of feedback is far superior than it was before. We're able to make quicker decisions. Feedback is invariably 80% plus submitted within 24 hours, when previously 48 hours, 72 hours plus was the norm. We haven't made hires yet from silver medalists, which was another outcome, but clearly we've saved an awful lot of time from a billing perspective. So that objective is definitely being met. And we expect to see more downstream results later with those silver medalists, particularly for roles which are becoming more and more prevalent as we move more and more towards data and AI, for example, where we may only have had one role to fill 3 months ago, but we're likely to have 30 next year, for example.
So Marcus, our audience here, 4 out of 5 people in the audience aren't actually using one of these, even though maybe 1 in 5 has piloted. So what advice would you say to anyone, either a leader or TA ops a person who's thinking about deploying this or looking at these tools? What pieces of advice would you share with them, having gone through that process of analyzing, procuring, piloting, rolling out, hearing the feedback? What can we learn from you to save ourselves the next time when we're deploying tools like this?
Start with a business problem. What are you trying to solve? This is a large change management exercise. So following best practice for change management is key. So make sure you can articulate what the problem is you're trying to solve. And that way, one, you'll be able to persuade the folks in finance to open the coffers and allow you to pay for the tool. But also then to work with the users, both candidates and interviewers alike, in order to articulate why the change is so critical. Our ROI was time saved and time spent away from billing, which clearly speaks to the finance perspective. We invested heavily in setting the tool up. There is an investment involved. The more time you're prepared to work in advance, we signed a contract in November. We weren't really using it internally until April. And that setup has proven itself in spades. If you can match questions, attributes adeptly to your ATS system, that summarization is allowed to be so much easier rather than needing to copy and paste as much. We've been able to sort of auto-populate a lot of the time, which has been massively helpful. Pilot underscored, always critical. We tested it on ourselves. We identified where skepticism may be. We identified where concerns may be. And we also identified that candidates were finding it, far better than we even suspected they might, even though they weren't talking across the interview spectrum. All their candidate conversations with recruiters were very positively received. And last but not least, make sure you refine from that feedback. Be transparent, and it never hurts to demonstrate quick wins. Fail fast has always been something that I've learned in my history in tech, and so going back to your stakeholders and demonstrating where you're already seeing positive candidate experience and feedback, and some of those quick wins is invariably going to help with that sort of making sure that change management lands once and for all.
Marcus, we have tons of questions for you that have been submitted. I don't have time live to put them to you. You might, if you get a chance, try and respond to some of those if you have a couple of minutes before you get drop off. I know you got a busy morning ahead in Chicago, but it's been a real pleasure to have you join us here and share those insights on how you've deployed over the last year, how you've set it up. I think it's a good yardstick for anyone thinking about deploying such technology. Thanks for joining us, Marcus.
My pleasure. Thank you.